Hello, yes, I'm Suzanne from Fraunhofer USA. I'm a staff scientist here. And we work on electrochemical treatment of PFAS. And today I'm going to present on a paper that we published just last year on electrochemical treatment of perfluoroalkyl acids and ion exchange still bottom solutions. So I'm going to give just a very brief introduction to Fraunhofer in case you haven't heard of us. We are a nonprofit R&D, applied R&D organization that was incorporated in the US in 1994. We're an affiliate of Fraunhofer Gesellschaft, which is the largest applied R&D organization in Europe. But in the US, we have a number of regional centers that most of which are paired with a local university as a partner. And so I'm at the Center Midwest up here in Michigan. We have two divisions under the Midwest Center, and that's Coatings and Diamond Technologies, and that's where I'm at in East Lansing, Michigan, and on the campus of Michigan State University. And we also have a laser applications division down the road in Plymouth. But being up here in Michigan, as you heard from Abby Hendershot's keynote presentation, water is a big deal to us in Michigan. It's very precious to us. We're surrounded by 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, which is a large chunk of the world's available fresh water. So being located in this area, there's a lot of activity in terms of water research and protecting our resources. And so one of those chemicals that we're interested in is, of course, PFAS. And I don't need to explain what that is to this crowd, but we know that it comes from a wide variety of sources and it gets into our waste infrastructure and environment. And eventually we become exposed to it. And that's a problem because of the health effects that are associated. So on the national level, there's health advisory limits for PFAS, but Michigan has some pretty stringent drinking water regulations that are put in place for a handful of different PFAS compounds. And so currently the strategy for meeting these regulations is to filter or adsorb PFAS in order to remove it from water. And the question after you use one of these technologies is, what do you do with the PFAS then? So what do you do with your adsorbent that's now loaded with PFAS, or your the concentrated PFAS solution where you filter out the PFAS? And so that's where this idea for using a destructive technology can come in, where the goal is then to permanently degrade PFAS molecules. So the type of destructive technology that we work with is called electrochemical oxidation, or EO, you might hear me say. And to put it simply, all this is taking an anode cathode pair and putting it into a solution that's contaminated with PFAS, and you apply a current to that solution. And the goal is to oxidize the carbon fluoride bonds of the PFAS backbone. And in doing that, you're breaking down PFAS, and you're going through this big mechanism that's shown here, where you have a number of electron transfers, radical reactions, and hydrolysis reactions that are shortening that PFAS backbone one CF2 group at a time. And so this is called the unzipping mechanism. And this goes through a combination of direct and indirect oxidation processes. And there's only a handful of materials that we can use for this purpose. And one of those is boron-doped diamonds. So I mentioned that we're the Coatings and Diamond Technologies division. So this is where the diamond comes in. So BDD is a material that we have worked with for other applications. And so with this PFAS problem that's become so relevant recently, this was a natural fit for us to explore this. So we've treated a handful of different PFAS contaminated waters and wastewaters, but what I'm going to talk about today is this project for working with ion exchange regenerate solutions, or still bottom solutions. And this was funded by the Michigan Translational Research and Commercialization Innovation Hub for Ag Bio, or MTRAC. And then this is our publication down here if you want to check that out for more details. But at any rate, the idea for this project was to take ion exchange solutions. So ion exchange is one of these absorptive processes where you can remove PFAS from water. And the way that this works very generally is you start with a high volume of a low PFAS concentration coming in. Your ion exchange resin can sorb the PFAS. So the PFAS sticks to that resin, and then the remainder of your water comes out PFAS free. You can regenerate that resin. So that means essentially to wash it so you can use the resin again. So you flush your resin with a mixture of salts and solvents to form this regenerate solution, which you can then distill to further reduce the volume. And so once you've distilled it, you have this low volume of highly concentrated PFAS contaminated water that's called a still bottom solution. And so our idea with this project was to take that still bottom solution and then treat it electrochemically. So sort of complete the cycle and permanently degrade the PFAS that had been removed. We were really interested in this for a couple of reasons, but mainly if you go from this initial volume of water that you're starting with to the still bottom, you can reduce that volume of water by 1,000 times. And so for us, that's really exciting for our process because we have a much smaller volume that we have to deal with and also a higher PFAS concentration. So our technology and our electrodes can really focus on degrading the PFAS versus other constituents that might be present. The type of treatment systems that we work with are called batch recirculation systems, which is essentially taking your solution batch in a reservoir tank and pumping that past our electrochemical cells, again, BDD electrochemical cells, while you apply your current with a power supply. And then the solution comes back into the tank and we just recirculate it for the duration of our treatment time. We build these systems in-house. The components are fairly simple. On the right-hand side is a physical picture of what our systems look like. So these systems are used to treat about 5 liters at a time, but we have scaled this up to 20-liter volumes. So to get into some of the data on this project, we worked primarily with synthetic ion exchange still bottom solutions just because that gives us a little bit more control over the solution that we're working with. And also the real still bottoms can be tricky to get your hands on, but I'll talk more about that later on. But at any rate, for the synthetic solution that we started our experiments with, just drawing your attention to the PFAS concentration. So we're talking about hundreds of milligrams per liter or parts per million of PFAS. And so that's the level of concentration that ion exchange process gives us. And with that, we also have a high concentration of chloride and also methanol, and then some total organic carbon content in there as well. And that just comes from that regeneration process where we're flushing those resins with salts and solvents in order to desorb PFAS. And this plot here is showing the PFAS concentration versus the initial concentration over time when we're doing electrochemical degradation of this solution. And so what we do a lot of times initially is a current density optimization. So we try to see if we can save on energy by reducing the current. But in this case, really what we found was that a higher current density for a shorter amount of time was really the most effective in terms of PFAS degradation and energy consumption. So with a current density of 50 milliamps per centimeter squared, we were able to achieve over 99% removal of perfluoroalkyl acids within 8 hours. And we also found that extending the treatment time beyond that 8 hours really, got us to the point of diminishing returns because we were consuming more energy. However, we weren't really, getting this rapid PFAS degradation because we had already degraded about 99% of it. So all that being said, from here, we took this 8-hour treatment time and the current density of 50 milliamps per centimeter squared for future experiments. We also looked at doing a little bit of a scale up of that reactor. So I showed a few slides ago the 5-liter reactors that we had, but we scaled this up to what we call the semi-pilot scale of 14 liters. So our lab scale experiments in this case, we were working with 2 liters of that synthetic ion exchange solution and about a 200 centimeter squared boron doped diamond anode area. We scaled this up to 14 liters of solution to treat because the electrode or the anode area that we were able to scale up to was about 1,400 centimeters squared. So we kept the same area, solution area to electrode area to solution volume ratio, just to try and keep things consistent going from the smaller scale to the larger scale. And so with that, again, we're looking at PFAS concentration versus the initial concentration as we're electrochemically treating that solution. We did, get that 99% removal of perfluoroalkyl acids after 8 hours. The semi-pilot scale, we took a little bit of a hit, but we still reached 94%. What was an interesting observation from this work was this idea of foam partitioning of PFAS. So this comes from the fact that when we're doing our electrochemical treatment, we're also splitting water. So we're generating some hydrogen and oxygen gas in our cell. And that creates these micro bubbles in solution, and PFAS, certain PFAS compounds like to go to those air-water interfaces. So that can form a foam. And so PFAS can partition into that foam. And this was significant for these solutions in particular because they're so concentrated in PFAS. So again, we're talking about hundreds of parts per million. So at those really high PFAS concentrations, we just had more chances for foam to be generated. However, the foaming was even more significant at the semi-pilot scale because we were using the same current density at both scales. And due to this equation down here, if you keep the same current density, but increase your anode area, you have to increase your current to maintain the current density. And so our applied current is actually directly proportional to the volume of gas that we generate. So it actually, if you look at this derivation of the ideal gas law, this makes a lot of sense why we were seeing that effect. So we were very foamy at the larger scale. Also within this project, I mentioned those real ion exchange still bottoms are hard to get your hands on, but we were fortunate to get about 2 liters of one from our partner in this, which was ECT2. And so we did some small scale experiments with that real ion exchange still bottom because we wanted to see how that compared to the synthetic solution that we had been working with.
About 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you. So we had about 93% removal of PFAS in the synthetic steel bottom, but we had to extend that treatment time to about 24 hours because our kinetics for PFAS degradation were about 3-fold slower in that solution. We think that this is because, if I can get there we go, of the difference in the total organic carbon content. So for the real steel bottom solution, we had about 6 times the TOC content. And when you have total organic carbon or other organic constituents in there, that can take away from the PFAS degradation and decrease your efficiency a little bit. So that's just something to consider for these solutions. However, all that being said, we think this is a really promising treatment train to pursue because for the 2 different scales we looked at for the 90% PFAA removal, we were at about 200 watt hours per liter for the electrochemical destruction. But if you consider the fact that your still bottom solution is less than 0.01% of your initial influent water volume, then you're looking at an energy savings of over 99.9% if we were tasking the electrochemical system to treat that entire volume of water. So we think that this is really promising and something worth pursuing further. So just a quick summary, we think this is a really viable way to decrease the energy consumption of a destructive process by decreasing the volume and also increasing the PFAS concentration. We do have to take in those TOC levels into account because that's going to take away from our EO efficiency, and also deal with this foaming process or foaming issue. How do we manage that in the future? Okay, so just quickly to acknowledge ECT2 and Michael Nicholson, he was provided us the solutions and was really helpful in us learning about that technology and how we can use it in conjunction with our system. And then at Michigan State, I want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Vanessa Maldonado. She just defended a few weeks ago, and this was part of her PhD research. So we were really grateful for her and just to Michigan State and MTRAC for funding the program. And thank you all to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Suzanne. We do have time for one question, and I think there is a question. Yes?
There is.
Fantastic.
If the foam is an issue during scale up, how do you keep PFAS in solution in order to connect the electrolyte and get destroyed? Contact the electrolyte. Get destroyed.
Right. Yeah, so over time, the foam will kind of settle down and those compounds will go back into the solution, but it does decrease our efficiency. So we're thinking about different things, either, using the foaming to our advantage, and, maybe we can collect that foam and then, deal with that concentrate, and degrade the PFAS in the foam there. Or we're thinking about, adding like a defoamer or something else in there to help prevent that separation.